Welcome back to Season 2 of the Spiritable podcast. My name is Luke.
I'm Richard. I'm getting a master's in divinity. On this show, we try to bring spiritual ideas down to earth.
We're all trying to be better people and grow, so get on board. All right. Welcome back to the Spiritable podcast. I'm Luke.
I'm Richard.
And today, our very special guest is Curtis Childs. Curtis is the lead and face man of OfftheLefteye, also a mini show called Swedenborg and Life, where they produce lots of content focused around spirituality and the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. How many videos have you produced at this point, would you say?
More than 700.
More than 700?
Wow.
I know that because somebody had to go. We just had a meeting in our organization, and somebody had to go through and label something on them. And yeah, it's more than 700, which if you had asked me that before this weekend, I would have said, probably about 400, but it goes up fast.
Does it all blur together?
Yeah. I don't even know. I don't even know what we do.
So before we get too into it, go over to OfftheLefteye on YouTube and look up Swedenborg and Life. Smash subscribe for Curtis there.
Boo.
You know the routine.
So I don't have too much of a history of how you got to where you are. I know that where you are now is a very successful place. You have almost 100,000 subscribers, right?
That we're getting close.
Getting close. Any day now, basically. The countdown begins.
Yeah.
So I came to this field, and you were, well established, had a lot of stuff going on, but I didn't see the kind of grind that got you from the conception of an idea to the success that you now have. So I'd be curious to know a little bit more of that history, if you don't mind walking me through it.
The grind has pretty much been like be at the right place at the right time and get lucky. I mean, there's been a lot of work, as you guys know. You're on YouTube, the treadmill of that, and trying to get noticed in an environment. I'm talking about all of the internet right now, which is like both perfect for trying to talk about worldviews, but also so crowded that it's difficult to stand out. So sure, you've got to put work in and you've got to put consistency in, but also I definitely feel like if I look back, there's a lot of the things that were most successful about what I've done were things where I thought I was going to go in the other direction, but something took off in this direction. So I'll give you a little history. OfftheLefteye is our strangely titled YouTube channel about, really it's a theory of everything, right? We can talk about, it's inspired by Swedenborg's spiritual material, but what that material contains is a theory of everything. So this is like a model of the mind, a metaphysical causality for why there is life in the first place. It's a guide book, like an ethical, philosophical guidebook. It's all those things because that's what Swedenborg gives you. And those are the tools I've been using to try to revamp my own mind and life. And we're kind of reporting on that and putting it out.
Imagine,
yeah. So it all was, I mean, initially you got to think this is like way back when there were dinosaurs roaming the earth. This is 2011. And I was looking at YouTube, and I was part of a project called New Church Live, which was trying to take Swedenborg and get him out on the internet. This is what everybody sees, like, oh my gosh, the stuff people are wondering about. There's answers to that. Let's do it. And we were trying to do that. And I saw YouTube and I said, look at YouTube. I didn't really know much about it, but I started to search things like God on YouTube. And man, were there some videos that were not that great, but had so many views.
Yeah.
And I said, well, man, we could try that. And I saw this conversation where there was these two poles. At the time, it was just like sort of anti-Christian, sort of reactionary-ish atheism. New atheism was big at the time, right? That was just totally all over the space. And there was people there were these legitimate gripes against the tenets of religion, right? Mm-hmm. Which I really enjoyed getting to go through and see, like, what about various forms of religion is unethical to people, and what bothers them, and what wrongs are they trying to right? So there was that. And then way over, I felt like there was a few like Christian fundamentalists kind of pushing back on that. But there was this whole gap of rational application and sort of the answers people were looking for that I felt like, Swedenborg fits in there.
Well, and what year was this? Sorry to interrupt.
That was 2011. No, 2010 is when we first put.
Okay. Well, I feel like that's really like not convenient, but fortuitous timing with the sort of spiritual age that we were in, where a lot of young people were falling into this new, at the time, classification that was the spiritual but not religious movement. I think we sort of just saw that coming in the late, early 2010s, late 2000s. So I feel like your sort of ethos going into that was aiming at that sort of population already, which I feel like is well timed.
Well, and I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, I'll do this now. And so this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right place, right time. And a lot of the videos, I mean, back then, YouTube changes over time. It's a different landscape now. It's more crowded now than it was then. There's a broader spectrum, even within the world we were trying to inhabit. So stuff that we could put out back then that would just rack up the views. Now it's much more of a science to try to get those views.
I do want to jump into some icebreakers. I have lots more questions that I could ask. Maybe I'll get to them. But I want to know if you're ready to get into a spiritual conversation.
Right now.
Right now. All right, Richard, do you want to ask any spiritual icebreakers?
You can start.
All right. First question. Ben, are we ready? All things rolling. Camera 1. Camera 2. Richard, give a check to the camera. All right.
3.
Here's one I like to ask a lot of our guests, because I feel like it cuts to the core of where they come from spiritually and where they want to go, and just formative experiences. So I would like to know, Curtis, if you have anything in your history that qualify as your best or worst spiritual experience.
Sure.
And you'd also take a minute to think about it if you need.
Yeah. No, I don't want to think about it for a minute. I'll just tell you right away. So I think that the thing that was most obviously important to me spiritually was I had a diagnosed with depression, and it got really bad around 18 or 19 or 20, like around in there, where I was really struggling with my mental state. I had obsessive compulsive disorder, all this sort of stuff that I'd had, in little bits. But it was hitting me really hard, like right after high school, right first, earliest part of college. It got to this point where my mind was just really unmanageable. Mm-hmm. And I was doing everything you got to try to do. Like I was trying to understand the physical side of it. And I was on medication for a while and getting hydrated, doing all that stuff. At the same time, it just forced me to really have to think about my mental landscape and what kind of thoughts and feelings I gave my attention to. And while initially that phase pushed me away from Swedenborg material because it was it gave me too much to latch onto and ruminate about, and it was too intense for me. Coming in a little bit later in that phase, that was when it really clicked for me that these ideas are not describing some religious thing somewhere. This is talking about how my mental processes work now. And that's when it became like, oh, spirituality is survival. It's not a hobby or something like that. Like this is what I need to keep going. So that I feel like was what really pushed me into you've got to stay doing this. And so to me, I didn't like it. I really didn't enjoy that period, and I really wished it would have stopped earlier. Yeah. But looking back now, it set me on a really good trajectory because now, armed with the tools that I had to develop to get through that, now I can tackle the regular crap that's in my life with much better tools than I ever had before.
Right. Yeah, Richard, you had a similar experience to that. Around the same age bracket.
Yeah, mine was a little bit younger. Mine was like pre-teen to teen.
Well, I thought yours was like sophomore year of college. You were having all those doubts and sort of.
Oh yeah, that was more of a spiritual doubts than depressive episodes. But I struggled with depression when I was little for sure, like 13 or so. Right. And then early college, I had a lot of like, oh wait, maybe everything is nihilism and all of religion is just humanity's coping mechanisms for their fear of death and the meaninglessness of existence. And so I played around with that for a bit, and it turned out to be not great. So here I am.
Right.
But I think those low points in our lives, everything's in balance, and we can only know goodness because we've experienced badness. If everything was monotone, it wouldn't mean anything. So I think those sort of formative experiences are necessary to get us to where we are. With that, do you have anything that stands out to you as your best spiritual experience? Most enlightened state?
Yeah, good. That's harder.
Yeah.
Because I go in and out of, and sometimes in my life, I'm at a period where they happen more often, states where I do feel really good. Mm-hmm. And particularly states where the spiritual principles that I have are working like magic. Like the There's that story about where there's a boat, and in the boat there's Jesus Christ and his disciples. You guys know that there's a storm, and the storm is coming up, and the disciples are saying, "Oh, this isn't good." And then Jesus says, "Stop," and it stops. And there's this line after that. Not to get religious on you guys, but I feel like this is cool. There's this line after that that's like, "Who is this that the wind and the waves obey him?" And that when I feel like, sure, you can hear a bunch of spiritual principles and you don't know, you're sifting through this open marketplace of information. And is this thing right? Just like you were describing with it, the nihilism, and is it a coping mechanism? What is it? How do you really know what's real? When something makes the wind and the waves lie down in your mind, if you look at the torrents of the negative thoughts and feelings you have, but some principle comes along and lays them flat, that's when you're like, oh, what is this? So I'm copping out of giving you a particular one because I don't know if I can think of like, oh yeah, there was that one time when I was in somewhere, I was on top of a mountain and then something happened, but I don't go to cool places like that. So really it's been these little things where my day-to-day, and particularly like when I feel like, wow, even getting these dishes done and getting this project done and trying to be a good
useful person. Yeah.
When that clicks, exactly.
Big time.
And it just feels like, dude, I could do this forever. So, and I'm trying to cultivate those states and get more and more of them.
I wonder, I'm going to say something, I don't know if it's true, but I wonder if people who are not religious look at religious people and think that they are just high on God all the time, like constantly feeling the love and power of religion. And I don't know, all the religious people and like the most faithful people I know have good days and bad days and ups and downs. Like I certainly have days where I am a stronger believer than the other day. It ebbs and flows and it's constant, but I have good days and bad days with that. I just wonder if people kind of assume that religious people are always super, super, super religious. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's kind of a classic loud minority. Or like, I don't know, when you think about like religious people, often you go to like fundamentalism,
right?
Like Bible Belt, Baptist praise kind of worship. And when you see that from the outside, you're like, oh, they must always be that way. But I would assume, I don't know a lot of like Bible Belt Baptists, but I would assume that they also have days where they doubt and days where they don't doubt. But when you see really boisterous celebration, you kind of make that pervasive to an entire lifestyle. I think pretty commonly.
Yeah. Well, they better not be in it all the time because I'm not as cool as I thought I was then. No, I mean, the fluctuation. I mean, the day-night cycle, the seasonal cycles. These things are part of being human. Yeah. And to me, it's like, if we're talking about these downtimes as being what spurs the growth and is necessary to not only understand what the good times are, but to continue to break down and get you to realize what is actually standing in the way of your good times. Like I would really love, I constantly wish like I should be here by now. Come on, haven't I been on YouTube talking about spiritual stuff for men all the way since 2010? And I haven't figured it out yet. I got dates whenever I want them. And I really like, there's even like, sometimes I'll feel like, man, like 3 years ago, I was in better shape than I am now, which is like a little bit deflating, but I think that really that's the way you continue to grow. So I would think the stuff that for me really keeps you like, oh, I'm tuned in, I'm staying tuned in, is usually more like some kind of manic ambition or something like that. Yeah. The actual like humility of spiritual growth, I think, is just prone to these, because part of, you said before you're going to say something and you don't know if it's true. That's what I'm doing with all this stuff. But I feel like part of what it is part of the main work that's being done is learning the humility, right? That's mainly my ego that is getting in the way of all these, what I would call heavenly feelings that we were discussing before. So I can get really feeling good and powerful at times, but actually the real work is like chipping away at seeing like, okay, where am I, too puffed up with stuff, but also the more you go through stuff, the more you understand what it's like to have vulnerability, and the more you really realize, oh, other people. Like I remember when I was in the path of a hurricane once, which usually I just hear about hurricanes on the news, and I think like, oh, a hurricane, look at it, so big. That's kind of exciting. That's big.
Sipping tea in your safe living room.
Yeah, that was not the case when I was in the path of the hurricane, and I was not in much danger. I was like in a hotel. It ended up being Category 1. It was fine. But it does change the way you think about it when you hear it on the news. Like you understand what that means now. You get what it is. Like, oh, the basements are flooding, and like that's brutal. So I think that's sort of how it is. It's actually useful because you get that empathy or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
Yeah, I also I think that generally the more you grow, the more you realize the areas where you need to grow. And I think that is kind of...
The more you learn, the less you know, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, if you're working from... If what you're dealing with right now is like, I shouldn't steal. Like, I shouldn't actually go into a store and take something and walk out. Like, that's going to be where you are. But once you have grappled with that and overcome it, you realize that stealing can mean a lot more than that. That maybe stealing is about, stealing credit from someone else, or
credit cards.
Well, that's kind of back to the first one.
We've gone full cycle.
But it sort of branches out, and you realize that there is so much more to this than you thought from where you were. And I think that's a personal idea of growth. But also like an organizational idea of growth. When you're just starting out, you're trying to figure out like, what kind of message do we want? Like, what kind of format are we working in? Mm-hmm. What kind of materials do we need? And as an organization grows, it can delve into more of the specifics of like, oh, how do we tweak this little thing to have a little bit of a different format, to have a little bit of a different message? And I love that you said within that is this day-night cycle, how it's not just a consistent, like, step-by-step, up. And I love in the beginning of Genesis, the creation of the day-night cycle, we always think about there's morning and then daytime and then evening, but that's not the order that it says it in. It says, and the evening and the morning were the first day. And I like that idea of evening comes before morning. Like, so you need to have those evening states, those darker times where maybe things aren't going exactly as you planned and you can't see quite as well how to get where you're going. And it's those things that lead to a morning, like a new realization, an exciting new birth time, which is just kind of a cool flip of that order.
Amen. You want to close the word and blow out the candle? that was good stuff, Richie. File that away. Transcript. Ben, whip up the transcript. Next paper or sermon or whatever you are up to.
I don't have many left. Yeah.
That's true. You're soon to be out here.
Yeah.
Anyway, not about you. It's about Curtis. Curtis, next question. Are you ready? What do you think your most extreme belief is? Most wacky, off the left eye, should we say, belief?
I don't know if that exactly transfers.
It worked for my purposes.
Yeah. Easily my most wacky belief is my most useful belief. And that is that you need to be skeptical of your own thoughts and feelings. And doing in the same way that you're skeptical of social media and that you're skeptical of incoming unknown phone calls and the way you're skeptical of interactions. And the reason I believe that, if you want to get to the wacky, is because Swedenborg says that our minds are spirits. So our minds are in this spiritual world right now. And you are just like, you think about physically, right now we're all talking about media bubbles and things, and that you are influenced by what bubble you're in. You're in spiritual media bubbles, right? And so if you just go with, if you're not street smart and like, okay, I'm like, you're saying I shouldn't steal this thing. What if it feels good to steal, right? Some people love that, right? And you're also going to get all these justifications that are coming in that are like, well, maybe I should because this reason X, reason Y, reason Z. Mm-hmm. So that's one, if you're talking about like moralism. But if you're in depression, you're getting that constant stream, and the stream is just trying to say, like, we hate you. You're no good. This event means you suck. This event means the same thing. This one does. Here's some weird way.
Accelerating the badness.
You're losing your value, whatever. And so to me, I just treat those as like, this is not me. Mm-hmm. This is something else. This is just some spiritual influence that I don't need. And doing that to distance the self from it so you can look at it objectively is like, you never found a better spiritual crowbar than that. So that's my weird belief.
I like it. We've talked a lot about how powerful and useful it is to rigorously question your own beliefs. It's something we said on the podcast at least 3 or 4 times. With lots of guests we've had.
And that idea of choice of personal identification, that the things happening inside you don't have to be the way that you identify yourself. Mm-hmm. Like just because my mind thought it doesn't mean that it is mine. And I don't have to want it to be mine. And I don't have to accept that it's mine. And I think that so much of the journey of spiritual progress is the recognition of this came into my brain, this came into my mind. Like, I don't have to value that to value myself. And being able to differentiate yourself from the things you don't want to be and the things you want to move away from is the only way to actually be able to change as a human. Yeah. So I really like that idea. It is one that I constantly come back to.
It's also freeing too, just to realize that you're not everything you think, and that things that come into your brain, you're not always responsible for, but you are responsible for the things that you harbor and invite in for a drink. But just in those, like for example, in the times when it's really, really dark or it's hard to get out of these negative thoughts, it just feels like you have all these demons pounding at your brain and saying these things to you. But I love that idea of equilibrium, how you have to be in spiritual freedom at all times. So even at that moment when all these demons are like banging at your door, there's another door on the opposite side with just as many angels knocking, waiting for you to open that. And so you have to sort of make this conscious choice of trying to open these different doors to pull yourself out of a bad spot. And that's always comforted me, at least, in those times.
And I've definitely had the experience of coming to realize in my mind, like, oh, I'm the adult in the room. That those demons knocking that you're talking about, those beliefs, those assessments that are usually like a thought and a feeling that come together, they can seem really credible. And like, of course, they're self-evidently true, not because they make logical sense, but just because they feel true when they're in there. But those are the same strands of mental chatter that push people to kill themselves and do, that stuff is where I can look and say, all right, I am going to be as critical of you guys as I am when I'm watching somebody on TV. And I think they don't know what they're talking about. I know they have different motives, right? So what I think is important is that the other door you're mentioning, if you got the demons coming in, that often where I feel like those angels is in my ability to stand up and say, like, I'm going to discern this. Like you think you're in an art gallery and people and the art looks weird and you don't understand it, but everyone's like, oh, it's so good. But you can say, like, this is not good.
This doesn't make any sense.
Tell me it's good. It's like that in the mind, that even if that stuff seems realistic, that you can say, like, no, you have to, I'm not just going to take your word for it. I often feel like that's that other door. And it's given that light of like, wait a second, I can assert myself in my own mind here.
Mm-hmm. I really like, I wrote down your quote there. I'm the adult in the room. I'm gonna file that one away. I like that a lot because I think that's powerful. It's really empowering to realize that no, I am in control. I have the choice to make here. I'm going to be the adult in the situation of whatever is happening to you in that time. So I'm gonna keep that one for later. I like it. All right, last question. Why does Winnie the Pooh wear a shirt and no pants?
Because it looks cute. It looks cute. Right?
I'm going to take that as blanket permission from Curtis Childs to go out in public and just be Winnie the Pooh.
Well, just see if it looks cute. Like, I just know when you think how he's drawn, it just like makes you look like you want to pick him up.
It's true. So he is cuter that way.
Yeah. So I think
I feel like if Winnie the Pooh rocked overalls, he'd still be equally as cute.
Well, but then he'd just be corduroy.
What? Oh, shoot. Maybe I was just funneling corduroy that whole time.
Yeah.
Wait a second. Have they been in the same room?
Oh,
Curtis, don't blow my mind right now, okay? I can handle the spiritual stuff. I cannot handle existential Winnie the Pooh questions.
Yeah, right. You're the adult in the room. Tell me to stop.
Luke, I also just need you to know that if you are in a shirt and no pants, it's not going to look cute. I'm sorry.
Curtis said it might.
Let us know in the comments.
Let us know in the comments if you think it would be cute. Who's to say?
So I have a question for you. So we've talked a little bit about where you, where your organization came from, where you guys are now. I want to ask where you're hoping to go. You know, if everything went exactly how you wanted it to in the next 5 years, or exceeded your expectations, what would your organization look like? How would it be different?
Yeah. So what I want to get to is where we're producing a way for people to have whatever you want to call what's good. You know, talk about the Lord, or talk about heaven, or your highest spiritual principles, or the stuff we're all talking about aspiring to here. I want to give people that as a constant companion. I just think about the way everything else is delivered to people, like the excellence at which technology and entertainment is done. There's so much effort and expertise going into that, but there's not a clear like brand leader in the spirituality world. Like I used to like to say Apple, because they used to be like, oh, everyone knows they're like the smartest, coolest company. I don't know if they're still that. I don't know, but you know that there's who's really good at this. You can say people might say
Elon Musk too, but I don't know, his tweets recently have been a little bit.
Yeah, right. That's a whole other podcast. Like, what's going on with that? So I want to get to a place where we're putting that kind of expertise into these things, because let's take I heard this article somewhere that's like, one of the saddest, or one of the great tragedies of our time is like all the smartest people in the world are going into trying to keep you on Facebook for like 14 more seconds, which is fine. But the science isn't even out as to whether social media makes us happier or less happy. There's a lot of people saying it actually degrades your quality of life. But these things, like that when people who are being crushed by depression and loneliness, or who are worried that they've lost something forever that they can't get back, that the core, like deepest stuff in life, we don't really know how to apply force to that, you know. And I want to get it so that we can put something together that does that puts this effort towards, like you're seeing now with the human race, like how do we figure out this virus that's ruining everything? Like, where all the labs are going together and we're putting so much effort and force into that. I want to find a way to do that with these spiritual ideas, so that we can. I've often said that, like, what I like about the Swedenborg ideas and the reality they present is that it allows me to solve problems that were previously unsolvable. Yeah. And I want to be able to do that on a big scale, like in the individual and for society.
Here's the idea for you, Chris. You can take this and run with it. So you grab your phone and just for like half an hour, just be like, it's going to be okay. You got this. You're going to make it through it. I believe in you. And have people download an app. Eventually you'll get to a point where you can just project a little hologram of yourself that can pop up, neurotransmit when they're feeling anxious. You can just arise and be like, hey, you got this. It's going to be okay. That's $1 million idea right there.
Let me write that down.
Yeah. Tell your lawyers.
I'm going to put somebody else in mind, because if I see myself saying that, I'd be like, what does he know?
I would love it if it was just the grossest version of you, like just on a beanbag chair eating wavy chips. Just, you're going to be fine.
Oh,
you mean lockdown version of me?
Right. All right, I have a follow-up question. I have 2 follow-up questions. I'll ask this one first. I wonder. So you talk about having the idea of spiritual growth and development be a process that's more kind of fleshed out, more systematic, and there's part of me that really likes that, but I also wonder whether human spiritual growth is not as linear as that. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if my process through growth looks the same as yours. Like, for example, I have a friend who is one of the most wholesome, wonderful human beings that I know. Very positive all the time. Great guy.
I'm right here. I don't know why he's.
It's not you. It's not you. And he is a recovering addict and had a lot of really, really bad years. And when you talk to him about it, he's like, yeah, working through that and overcoming it changed my life so much. Like, it is wildly different how I view the world and my place in it after being in that dark place. And that's awesome that he was able to take something that was so destructive for him and turn it into something so powerful. But very obviously, I wouldn't be like, aha, well, everyone needs to get real addicted and then work through that. Here's the steps. Right. And so, like, people make spiritual growth out of the most varied things. And there are some times where it seems like an experience happens to someone and it shapes them into something truly beautiful. And that same experience happens to someone else and it crushes and debilitates them. So I don't know, maybe I'm a little skeptical about the systematizing of spiritual progress.
Right. Well, so it's a great point. The way I think about it is, like, for example, is it healthy to take vitamin D? It depends. If you're vitamin D deficient, yes, it can change you like that. Like, or like, my grandfather, he was in the hospital when he's getting close to dying, and he was just really acting out of character in a negative way, just not cooperating with nurses and just not like him. And turns out he was iodine deficient. So they gave him iodine and he snapped back into being himself. So when I think about spiritual growth, yeah, you can't say, do this, don't do that to anyone. Just like with health, you can't say take vitamin D or don't take vitamin D, but you can develop tests to where you see, like, oh, you're vitamin D deficient. And I don't think you're ever going to be able to, like, I think there's probably a really good analog to it in the way that we interact with the human body. Because you think about it, well, in Swedenborg, there's this concept of sort of divine will versus divine permission, that there's multiple routes to get to an outcome. And if the only one available is the most painful one, it'll happen. But if conditions were better, we could get to that same outcome without the suffering and actually get a better outcome. So can we make it so there's some more, we're only going into those dark places when you really got to go in them.
Yeah. And to me, a lot of this sounds like a way of, I don't want to be controversial, but a way of updating what church used to be. Because I think church or religion used to be this place of sanctity and safety for people to voice what's happening to them and work through it on a ground level. And I think a lot of people are so dissatisfied by religion or faith practices that sort of spiritual fulfillment and help isn't there in the same way. So maybe this is just, it sounds like a way of bringing that sort of safety and wholeness back into people's lives who don't even know what they need. And because I think that there's a lot of people struggling to find that fulfillment right now. And maybe something like that would really help them along their path to feeling heard. Because it's especially hard to just talk about what's going wrong spiritually or what you need help on such a deep, fundamental level, that maybe having something more personal would help with that in ways that people don't have right now. So I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that actually leads me right into the follow-up question I wanted to ask, which was, how do you see the uses of your organization as different and distinct from a church, and what do you see as similar? Because you guys don't define yourself as a church organization, but there are a lot of analogs of similar uses being served. The creation of spiritual community and the propagation of spiritual ideas. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question, because just technically, we're a not-for-profit organization that's not registered as religious, as a church. There's just some kind of state technical distinction, but you can wander onto our channel and hear me talking about angels and the Bible and the Lord and all the very like, okay, that sounds very churchy sort of stuff. And I think that's just going to be the nature of anything you do around Swedenborg's material, because it's chock full of that kind of terminology and that sort of language. So, okay, so and this gets into such a gray area, because what do people define? I think that what a lot of people associate churches with often is a certain kind of membership and ritual, and all that it's intertwined with things like life rites, like funerals and weddings, and like the sort of sacred officiation of those sorts of things, which we're not going to be doing, I think, now or ever. What's that?
I said yet.
Yeah, right. Unless there's money to be made in those. So I also, I'll just say we are in information distribution. We are not in enforcement, right? You'll have organizations that will say like, okay, you have to live in this particular way. That we're more like, I see us as like a direct extension of what Swedenborg was doing. Because he was like taking these books, writing them down, publishing them out, sending them to church leaders, sending them to academic leaders, and within the material, he's like, okay, I'll give you an idea, and then I'm going to try to get it so that you understand this idea. And sometimes I'll give you an example in the way that bees operate and how it should get this nebulous spiritual idea to make sense to you. And sometimes he'll relate. Sometimes he'll appeal to common sense. Sometimes he'll use philosophy, those sorts of things. So I see us as we're trying to distribute that. We're trying to do the same thing, distribute the information. But the way that Swedenborg defines church, it's, the core unit of church is one heart and one mind, right? And that the church is a state of being inside a person. So I'd certainly say that I'm hoping we create little churches inside people.
Yeah. So
I don't know, man. I don't know. What are we actually good at? It seems like we're good at video, but that's just what we tried first, So I could see, like, you just think about the potential for stuff like virtual reality and augmented reality. What's it like? And this is something I can't convince my team to do because it'd be way too labor intensive. But I want to like get in there and you put your like Oculus Rift or whatever on your head, and you can like look around and explore either ideas or the worlds that Swedenborg described. I want to do a video game, by the way.
Okay.
I just think about you think about
like Adventure Through Heaven and Hell sort of video game.
That's what I'm talking about.
I'm into it.
In there because think about, okay.
Oh, Path of Redemption title. You start out in the like lowest level of hell. You get to grind it out top level of heaven.
Yeah, right. And it's like a picture, like a little Atari game.
That sounds awesome. I'm into it, man.
I'd play it. Well, I think I just asked the last question. Did you have questions you still wanted to ask?
I do, but I can pepper them in at the very end when we're closing out. There'll be good closing thoughts.
All right, cool. Just diving into this idea. So I guess one question I want to ask you. So from my perspective as someone that is about to be a minister in a specific church organization, I have ideas about what Swedenborg's teachings are and what they mean to me and what they mean to people. But I'd love to hear, if you're willing, just a little bit about what you see as like the identity of Swedenborg's ideas. Like, was he a really cool philosopher? Was he a revelator? What is your thought on that? What's your take?
Yeah, I would say that in Swedenborg's material is the single source, most complete description of reality that exists. So there's a lot of areas that we know a lot more about than is expressed in Swedenborg's writing. Like he'll talk a little bit about biology, but what we know now as compared to what he knew, that we know so much more about cells and all this kind of stuff, right? But if you had to sit back and write a summary of life, if you had to give the cliff notes on what reality is, that there's nothing even close, because you have some places that describe it a lot more thoroughly, but they don't acknowledge these huge swaths of reality that do exist. So to me, Swedenborg is this absolutely indispensable. There's not some of the ideas that are in there you can find other places, right? There's some that are very broad. That's the cool thing about it. It connects to stuff very broadly. A lot of the more in the weeds stuff you can find a percentage of those other places, but there's whole disciplines that he's trying to describe that we don't have. I wouldn't be doing the channel that we have if I didn't think that this was the best way I could help the world. I think that the potential for good in there this is the highest potential to break down the stuff that's getting in the way of the human race. And I think there's parts of it that I have to wrestle with, and there are parts of it that I'm like I don't think so. But in general, I think that it's a really good description of what really is. And as far as who Swedenborg is, I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm a Swedenborg fan. I don't know anything about the books he wrote that aren't his spiritual material. Mm-hmm. There's a lot out there, aren't there? But it's not like I'm like, dude, he is my favorite philosopher, and I gotta go read his
daily routine is great. I gotta get into it.
Yeah. I gotta read his Economy of the Animal Kingdom. That's gonna be awesome, or even later when he was writing all of his spiritual material, he wrote some treatise on the mining or currency in Sweden or something. I don't care. It's not like but the voice of the books that we're focusing on which is if you know Swedenborg, there's a very clear, there's shadows of it earlier, whatever. There's this very clear, intense distinct break line. where there's a distinct segment of it where he's got a consistent message throughout. And to me, that's the friendliest voice I ever met is in there. When it comes to reaching out to me and in my little life with my little problems, that's the best friend that I have. The other stuff is trying, but that's my best friend. So that's how I feel.
Thank you. This is a side question we don't have to include, but something I keep thinking about is the sort of intellectual barrier to Swedenborg's works. Do you see that as a barrier? Do you see these as appealing to everyone? It's hard for me to look at the totality of his theological works and be like, yeah, any old person can read that and be enlightened, because it's heavy stuff. And I think about my grandparents who don't know about Swedenborg. Could they pick up Arcana Volume 3 and be like, oh yeah, this is my jam? I just don't think so. But so it's something I'm wrestling with.
They better not be able to, because then I'm out of a job. Listen, all ideas could benefit from study and clarification. You just look at the public discourse around even well-known subjects you can study easily for yourself. Getting people to really understand something as it is really difficult. And taking the time to pour through something and make sure there's the correct distillation to really get it is you can apply that to anything. So certainly to Swedenborg's, but I really think the main reason why something like what we're doing is useful is that you better understand every individual statement that Swedenborg makes when you understand the totality, because he's got such a self-referential world that I think you can pick up, let's say Heaven and Hell is Swedenborg's most popular book, sure. Right? You can pick that thing up, open the first page, open a page in the middle, and get what I think is absolutely the wrong impression of what the message is.
Right.
Because you've got to know, there's one of the first of these long form videos that we did, there's a section in Heaven and Hell about the world of spirits, which is the initial state you're in after the death of the body, right? And I remember the Swedenborg Foundation had published this little booklet that was called Our Life After Death, which was just that section that was meant to be user friendly, and then had it translated especially in a user-friendly way. So this is the right thing to get you in. And it begins, the world of spirits is a place that's neither heaven nor hell, but it's where we spend our first amount of time before we're either raised up into heaven or thrown down into hell. And so there you go. That's traditional Christianity, and you're going to get thrown into hell. But in that same book, Swedenborg will say, no one's ever thrown into hell. Right. It's your own loves that lead you in there. And there can be an appearance, because if you absolutely love something that is hellish, that you dive into that and it looks like you're going head first. So even Swedenborg, even and love of the Lord and love of the neighbor. He talks all the time about love of the Lord and love of the neighbor. Love of the Lord and love of the neighbor. It's so important. Only a couple times does he ever say what those are. You think, what's love of the Lord? It's like you think about Jesus Christ and just like how much you love him, right? Love of the Lord, and I think there's in heaven and hell, there's a definition. Love of the Lord is loving the good that comes out of the Lord, and love of the neighbor is loving the truth. So it's just like he'll give you these crucial definitions, and so much you've got to have the whole, or you're going to get the wrong impression. Yeah. I think if your grandparents pick it up, I don't want them to, and you see this in YouTube comments. People will think, oh, well, he just says this, which is the same thing that I got burned with when I was young, and I'm out of here. You do need to. You do need to understand. If you don't have a guide, some people just dive in and get it. Other people, the main killers are, they find it, they'll get offended because they think it's saying something it's not, or they'll get bored, or it's too dense and you don't find that living help in there. Yeah. So you just put it down.
Well, I think that's sort of an analogy to people's mindsets about things in general. Like, we should approach everything with an open mind and be willing to hear the extent of an argument before we form a conclusion. Like, don't just pick up one of Swedenborg's books, Conjugal Love, read the last couple pages and be like, this doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it's the same thing with any like political system, just understanding how it works or another person's perspective on an opinion they have. Like, hear it out, understand it, and then form a sort of positive judgment about it. Don't just jump in and assume the worst or pick apart a minute point that someone might not really mean for their whole argument. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah, it is a really interesting point, this idea of like, it's to create a complete understanding, you need to put in some effort. It's not like with something that, especially something that has so much breadth and so much complexity and interconnected ideas that have kind of, that add to the definition of each other. It's not something that you necessarily pick up and are like, oh yes, an easy breezy read. And I was just thinking about a time that I picked up a book for coding, and I opened it up and I was like, oh, I've never really looked into coding, but this is like a coding 101 textbook. And I worked in an IT department for like 4 years. So like I know my way around technology like a little bit. And I opened it up and I was like, what is this? Like, I see English words, but I understand nothing. Like, I have no idea what's happening right here. And I think where spirituality is concerned, people often assume that it shouldn't be that way. Assume that like, oh, if it's a spiritual practice, like I need to be able to just like look at it and get it and bada bing, bada boom. It should just make sense. But I think that inevitably any change is hard. And we know that about the human condition, that change is hard. But when we look at change of our spiritual ideas and our ideas about what reality is, I think it's easy to be like, but like it should just make sense right away. Right. And there's some truth to that. Like it shouldn't be like I'm trying to force myself to believe gibberish. There should be something that's like, oh, that's really fascinating. Oh, I really connect with that. But throughout the process, there's probably going to be a lot of like grappling with and trying to understand where that hits the ground and the breadth of that idea and what it's connected to. And it's a process of learning a whole system, which every system has complexity.
Right. So, but I also don't think you can expect everyone to be able to go into the same depth of complexity as another person within that sort of system. Like within a hierarchy, you can't have everyone be governors or else it's not going to function. Yeah. Like there has to be lower barriers of entry for people who can't get anything else, or that's just where they are in life, or their culture and geography is not in a position to give them access to Swedenborg's writings or even Christianity or whatever. Like we can't have that as a bar for entry to people. I think that's what gets me sometimes is like I maybe tend to oversimplify religion and theological practice because I think it has to be that way so that people can be good and get to heaven and understand how to better themselves. Like I think there's a very intuitive nature to a lot of it where by being critical of yourself and analyzing yourself and your ideas, be able to better yourself and get to a good point. I don't think each person needs to spend 100 hours studying a particular set of books in order to get to heaven. And I'm not trying to oversimplify what you're saying, but I think especially in our religion, people who study Swedenborg's works, it can get very intellectual very quickly and get into the weeds of these greater ideas and this minutia. When I think the reality is pretty simple, which is just be a good person, don't be a jerk, love other people more than you love yourself, and the world's going to be a better place. And these big ideas are very simple and can get broken down into really complex things like what is being good? What is loving yourself? What does that look like? We can break that down for hours and hours and hours. But I think those big ideas are pretty simple and can be for a reason. And I think that's okay.
Yeah. And I think that in Swedenborg's books, it lays that out pretty explicitly where he's like, this is a lot of complicated stuff. And there are different times where he's like, but if you follow the 10 commandments, like you'll be good.
Yeah.
Like if you follow the 2 great commandments, you'll be good. Like this stuff can really help. And this stuff can make it a lot easier if you're looking at the 10 commandments and saying, but I just don't know what to do in this situation. Maybe you want a little bit of a further explanation. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, like if you love the Lord and you love the neighbor, if you just do your best to be a good person, things are going to work out because like you were saying, you go where you love. So if you love other people and love putting goodness out into the world, that's what heaven is. That's what heavenly people are. So I think it is beautiful in a way that it is often intensely complex and at the end of the day, in a lot of ways, extremely simple.
Yeah, no, that's true. I didn't have any really follow-up thoughts to that.
No, I would keep following up on all these, but I know that we're way over time, so I'm just like, yep.
Yeah, so I guess just to get your input on this before we finish up this specific conversation, I guess, what do you hope that your viewer base's involvement with the text that you are delivering to them will be? Like, are you hoping that they just are super into all your videos? Are you hoping that your videos inspire them to pick up a book? Like, is that part of your goal?
Yeah, it depends on what the videos and what the books do for them. What we want to deliver ultimately is concepts. And as you said, concepts that are acted on and produce good outcomes. So I think the medium, there are some people who are just never going to want to read books. And there are some people who are never going to get the kind of study and understanding out of video content that they get out of the books. So what I want to do is I know that I'll absorb a lot through Swedenborg's books. I can absorb through video. In the end, it becomes thoughts and feelings and actions, right? So how do we create it so that we can make it so you get to those thoughts and feelings and actions? And what I hope for people is that they find a framework in whatever way their mind processes it that allows God to sort out the things that were troubling them. So in whichever way that is, I would say I don't have a particular agenda to whether they hang on our content or go into Swedenborg's books for themselves. I am excited when somebody does, because I feel like if they're watching the videos and then like, oh, I'm going to read more, it just means that they're getting into the kind of, like, I'm a really high consumer. I'm reading Swedenborg books all the time. And that's actually what gives me a lift. So I think when I hear that people are getting a lift like that. But yeah, I would say really we're looking for life change, and for us to try to provide a means for that to happen, to remove the barriers to that happening, which the barriers can be any of the things we're talking about. Could be that they don't have the time to devote to it themselves. So we're providing that service of here's the ideas package. It could be that they're having trouble or they need community around it, whatever it is. I want to get it so that there's a certain joy that people get when something's clicked for them and they've opened a little bit to the kind of happiness that I would call heaven, and they express it. We can see it in the comments when we talk to people. I want to get that, and through whatever means.
Do you have any, like, if someone came to you and was like, what's the first book I should read of Swedenborg's? Is it Heaven and Hell? Is it like True Christianity? Do you have a recommendation you throw out?
Yeah, Heaven and Hell. And even when I say that, I am part of like, but wait, let me read it with you, because
control issues. I see.
You're going to think it means this, and and I don't know if you're going to get how cool that is. Cause it wasn't, I had to learn what it's, how cool it really is. So yes, but if someone was asking, I think Heaven and Hell is, and you think of heaven and hell as like this description of afterlife, but there's a lot of philosophy. There's a lot of like, mental philosophy and way of being stuff in there. There's just a lot of unexpected stuff in there. I remember I had to do a presentation on it to people who weren't familiar with Swedenborg, and as I was getting ready, this was years ago, but I really felt like I knew the book. It's like, oh, it's Heaven and Hell. It's like his most popular. Of course, I know it inside and out, but just getting ready for that and reading through, I was like, I don't feel like I've read any of this, because concepts that the more I learn, the more things jump off the page to me that before I just glossed over. So I feel like you're constantly finding new, as your understanding of the whole grows, you're finding new little treasures.
Well, that's circular too, because we sort of talked about that in the beginning. That's why I love when Richard comes with things that he's been reading that are new to him, because they're often, or pretty much all the time, things that I haven't thought of. Like the evening and morning thing, I would have just read over that and been like, oh, that was weird. They didn't say morning and then evening, and not stopped and reflected and gotten that. So I love when things that I've read over or think I know get unveiled to me in a new way. It's super cool and really, really satisfying. Definitely like amps me up and makes me feel empowered.
Yeah, I feel like where that comes to life for me so often is not, I mean, obviously a lot of times it's in new ideas because new ideas are exciting. But because I am so engrossed in the ideas all the time, I'm about to have a master's degree in these ideas, so I've spent a lot of time with them. So oftentimes it is, because I'm a student, a very purely intellectual thing. And when there are other people that repeat ideas that I already know and how impactful and powerful those ideas have been, it makes me see them in a whole new way. Like the idea of equilibrium, that was something I had known for a long time. And I remember one time you brought up how powerful it was for you personally in your life. And it had always just been like some structural, intellectual thing that I knew. And I was like, oh, it's a cool idea. I like ideas. And then to hear someone be like, this is powerfully impactful in my life, I was like, whoa, it is a totally new idea to me now.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
I think it's like, you can be reading a plant book. It's like, okay, this is what a rhododendron is. Okay, that looks cool. Oh, this is stuff about its roots. But then it's like, oh, that's one. Like I'm really walking out here and seeing the real thing. Like that's why it's cool to bounce all the stuff we're doing off of our whole audience, because they'll come back and certain parts will live for them that I didn't really think of. But you'll see that, oh, that's the part of the potential of that idea that I didn't get before.
Right. All right, I have one last question. Richard, do you have a question?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. I approach you, Curtis. I triple your salary in an offer to do a similar show, but about Hinduism. Do you take it? What's your line between that sweet, sweet cash and your spiritual integrity?
Yeah. I can't do that. I'm sorry. I have to turn down your show because I don't it's like super fun, but I'm doing what I think is the best thing that I can do to try to help people. And I would just feel like, not that there couldn't be a lot of good done in a show like you're describing, but it hasn't. This is where I've seen like this is what we can do that's going to change the world. So I got to stick with this because that's like what you got to. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah, got to follow your heart there.
Yeah.
I expected nothing less from you, Curtis. I will be honest. I expected nothing less. All right. Well, I don't want to keep you for too long here. Thank you so much for taking your time to come and join us on our podcast and talk a little bit about you and your life and a little bit of the weeds of Swedenborgy thoughts. So I appreciate it.
Feel free to hit our audience with any plugs you want right now.
Oh yeah, man. Go do some good stuff, man. Yeah, that's about it.
Beautiful plug. Beautiful plug. Well, your channel is OfftheLefteye. The show you create is Swedenborg and Life, correct? Am I messing that up?
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. And we also have a couple of other shows. News from Heaven is one of our shows. Right. Good Question is one of our shows. But if you search OfftheLefteye and Swedenborg and Life, you'll find us, no problem.
Okay, go find them and check them out. Curtis, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was awesome to have you.
Awesome.
Great.
See ya.
Well, thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Spiritable. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Spiritable.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Spiritable. If you are listening to just the audio right now, come check out our YouTube video. It's tight, and comment below, and we will respond. There's a bunch more stuff there. If you have questions that you want to email us about, you can email us at spiritablepodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you want to be on our show, we're just Skyping people in. It's going to be so easy. Email us and be like, can I be on your show? And we'll be like, yeah, dude.
Hop in for 5 minutes. Tell us
5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 4 hours.
Okay. No.
Luke will never leave here. He's here.
Goodbye.
Check it out. Later. Peace.